Hi, everybody. My name is Carlo Matta. I head the European platform of CA Ventures, which is a very large US-based, mainly operator and developer of student housing. And we are operating, we are developing and operating assets all over Europe, both in UK, Ireland, and continental Europe. This is a great question. Actually, let me maybe unpack it, because I think there are two aspects to this question. The first one is the opportunity in student housing. You know, student housing has been establishing itself as an asset class, which is completed the transition from alternative asset class to mainstream institutional level investment class. And that is an opportunity that is present all over Europe. There are countries that are more advanced, like UK, Ireland, Netherlands, and countries that are a little bit behind, like Italy, Spain, and Portugal. That doesn't mean that the opportunity is less interesting. Actually, is exactly the opposite. And the second question within the question is the opportunity in Italy. I think Italy is uniquely positioned to really enjoy a huge windfall from the student housing asset class transformation. There is a lot of money globally that is getting out from retail and offices, and is pouring into alternative asset class. They call it residential, which includes student housing, senior housing, and PRS, multifamily, as they call it in US. PRS, as they call it here in UK, which is basically big rental buildings managed by a professional institutional operator. Why I say that Italy can benefit hugely from this trend is because Italy is roughly, and this is not a negative, but is probably 10 years behind UK and 15 years behind US in terms of development of the sector. If we look at the very simple metrics, which is the student per private bed, US, for every 100 students you have 60 private bed. That ratio in UK is for each 100 students you have 30 private beds, and the ratio in Italy is 100 to 4. So you can imagine the runway and the future opportunity that student housing can provide. Obviously, there are cultural difference. Students in Anglo-Saxon country get out of the house much earlier. Is a culture of going away from home to study, whereas in Italy, we tend, I studied staying with my parents all my university years. This is a cultural thing, but is changing. Not only that, but there is an increasing influx of international students, and international students require a certain type of student housing. The other interesting thing I noticed, going back to Italy and developing student housing in Italy, is that there is a virtuous cycle, which is there is now the discovery that university needs to be competitive. So you have excellent university like the Polytechnic or Torino or Milan. They understood that to be competitive, they need not only to have a curriculum which is interesting and taught in English, but they also need to provide accommodation, decent accommodation, available accommodation for international students. And why is so important to attract international students and attract talent? Because talent tend to stay on the territory, and the territory which is rich of human talent tend to attract companies' headquarters. So I think there is now there is a new let's call it team working toward the PBSA, to the student housing, which is the municipality on one end, so the politician on one end, the companies on the other hand, and the third leg of the table is the university. So they're all working together to increase and improve the offering of the curriculum of the university, And the student housing plays a key component in this higher quality of offering. So the main pro of the student housing sector, I think, is resilience. You know, the sector went through, the big financial crisis in 2008. First of all, let me say that the sector is relatively young. We are talking about probably in the States is 20 years old as a class. In UK, a little bit less. In Italy is very, very recent. But as a sector, we have data that spanned back 15 years, 20 years. And what the investor had noticed that the PBSA sector has performed very well during downturn times. So during the big financial crisis 2008, actually the student housing was the only asset class to maintain and increase the value. The real estate asset class that maintain and increase the value. And during the COVID downturn, actually hold up very well. We have a huge portfolio. We have, we're managing 50,000 beds in US, and delinquency on rental was very, very low. Students tend to stay put in their student housing because wherever they decided to study has become their adopted city. So they rather stay there and then go back to live with the parents. So we didn't see the massive exodus that everybody was anticipating. So these two big crises that really cemented the reputation for student housing to be extremely resilient. So that is definitely a pro. There is an increased interest from institutional investors, as I mentioned earlier, on the sector. So there is more money pouring in. And so I think this is a summarized the big pros. There are obviously cons. One of the main cons is that it's difficult to build scale. Big institutional investors need scale to invest, and typically the student housing assets tend to be small. Small tickets, and so you need to be able to aggregate portfolio to make it interesting for the institutional investor, both when you develop or when you sell it to long-term capital. The other cons, it is not really a cons, it's more of a feature, a characteristic of the asset class, is that student housing is a little bit like an hotel, so you need a very capable management team. So it's not enough to build a great building in a great location. If the property management, marketing, and leasing team is not up to scratch, then you're bleeding value. So being able to fill the building as soon as possible, be able to maintain and keep the student happy, so they renew the leases, is key. And also a good management team keeps the operating costs low. So having that team is key. We are lucky because we have that team in-house. Other developers/investor use third-party property managers, but you need really to identify a good third-party or a good in-house team that will help you create and maintain the value for the asset. I'm based in London, and I have a pan-European view. I travel to Italy very often, so I know what's happening. We have a team on the ground, but I think there is an increased interest from large institutional investors on the country. When we started the pan-European expansion in 2018, I had to really struggle also internally to convince my boss that Italy was an interesting market, and back in the days there were few large investors that were looking at Italy. Now the number has dramatically increased. I think there is a very strong interest, and so I think we will see a lot of more money pouring into the country. I think the Olympics in Milan definitely will help put the country, the city of Milan, but also the country on the map. So that is definitely a trend that I see will continue. Specifically on student housing, as I said earlier, we are really at the beginning of the long journey of institutionalization of the asset class and the development of the business. My projection is that in the next 5 to 10 years, the specific asset class will grow tremendously. We will see a cap rate compression. Right now it's very difficult. If you are an investor, you want to buy a portfolio of student housing in Italy, it's very difficult to find product. I would say it's almost impossible, to the point that, when we underwrite deals for development, the cap rate is very difficult to find comps. It's impossible to find comps. So the exit cap rate are just an educated guess more than a work of analyzing comps. So that, I think, will change with more product developed, more transaction happening. Cap rate will go down, and that will in turn increase invest more money for development will come into Italy.